Sarah Martinez walked through the dusty streets of downtown Phoenix, her worn sneakers making soft sounds on the cracked pavement. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly, but she barely noticed the heat anymore. At 35, she had learned to endure much worse conditions than a summer day in the desert. She carried a small backpack containing everything she owned in the world. Inside were 2 changes of clothes, a water bottle, some crackers she had saved from yesterday's meal at the shelter, and a faded photograph of her military unit. The photo was creased and yellowed, but the faces of her fellow Navy SEALs still smiled back at her with the confidence of youth and purpose. Those days felt like a lifetime ago. Back then, she had been Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, one of the first women to complete the grueling Navy SEAL training program. She had pushed her body to limits most people could never imagine. She had jumped from helicopters into freezing ocean waters, survived weeks in hostile territory with minimal supplies, and led rescue missions that saved countless lives. Now, she was just another homeless veteran trying to make it through each day. The transition from military hero to street survivor had not happened overnight. After her discharge, Sarah had struggled with nightmares and flashbacks from her combat experiences. The loud noises of city life reminded her of gunfire. Crowded spaces made her feel trapped and anxious. She had tried several jobs, but none of them felt meaningful after the intense purpose she had known in the military. Her family had tried to help at first, but they could not understand what she was going through. Her parents lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. They wanted her to come home, settle down, and live a quiet life. But Sarah could not sit still. The walls of her childhood bedroom felt like a prison after years of sleeping under open skies in foreign countries. She had moved to Phoenix hoping the warm weather would help with the joint pain she suffered from old injuries. The city was large enough for her to disappear into, and the veteran services were supposed to be good. But the reality was different from what she had hoped. The waiting lists for housing assistance were months long. The job market was competitive, and many employers were hesitant to hire someone with gaps in their employment history. As Sarah walked past a small diner, her stomach rumbled loudly. She had not eaten a proper meal in 2 days. The crackers in her backpack were stale, but she was saving them for tonight when the hunger would be worse. She paused outside the diner's window and looked at the menu posted there. A burger and fries cost $12. She had exactly $8.37 in her pocket. It might as well have been $100. Through the window, she could see families enjoying their meals together. Children laughed while their parents helped them with their food. An elderly couple shared a piece of pie, smiling at each other with the comfort of many years together. For a moment, Sarah allowed herself to remember what it felt like to belong somewhere. She pulled her baseball cap lower over her eyes and continued walking. 3 blocks ahead was the community center where she hoped to use the computers. She had an interview scheduled for tomorrow at a security company. It was not the kind of work she really wanted, but it was a job. The pay would be enough for her to rent a small room and maybe even save a little money. The security company specialized in providing guards for office buildings and shopping centers. The work would be mostly standing around and watching for trouble. It was far from the high-stakes missions she had once led, but Sarah had learned to be practical about her expectations. As she approached the community center, she noticed a group of young soldiers hanging around outside. They wore the distinctive uniforms of the nearby military base and had the cocky attitudes that came with being fresh out of basic training. Sarah recognized that look. She had once worn it herself. The 5 young men were loud and boisterous, clearly enjoying their day off base. They were probably in their early 20s, still full of the invincibility that military training could give to young people. They joked with each other and strutted around like they owned the sidewalk. Sarah tried to walk past them quietly, keeping her head down. She had no desire for confrontation or attention. All she wanted was to use the computer for an hour and then find a quiet place to spend the night. But as she got closer, one of the soldiers noticed her. He was tall and broad-shouldered with short blonde hair and small, mean eyes. His name tag read Thompson. He nudged his friends and pointed at Sarah with a smirk. "Hey guys, look at this," Thompson called out loud enough for everyone around to hear. "We got ourselves a genuine street person here." Sarah kept walking, but she could feel their eyes on her. She had dealt with worse situations than this, but she was tired and hungry, which made everything harder to handle. "I bet she's one of those fake veterans," another soldier said. This one was shorter but stockier, with dark hair and a permanent sneer. His name tag said Rodriguez. You know how they pretend to be military to get sympathy and handouts. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she continued toward the community center entrance. She had learned that responding to ignorant comments usually made situations worse. Better to ignore them and move on. But the soldiers were not finished with her. They had nothing better to do and had found someone they thought was an easy target for their entertainment. Thompson stepped into her path, blocking her way to the door. "Hold on there, lady," he said with mock politeness. "We're having a conversation here. Don't you think it's rude to just walk away when someone's talking to you?" Sarah stopped and looked up at him. Even though she was not particularly tall, she carried herself with a straight spine and steady gaze that came from years of military discipline. But Thompson only saw a thin woman with worn clothes and tired eyes. "I'm just trying to get inside," Sarah said quietly. Her voice was calm and controlled, but there was an edge to it that the young soldiers completely missed. The other 3 soldiers gathered closer, forming a loose circle around her. They were grinning like this was the most fun they had had all week. Thompson looked Sarah up and down with obvious disdain. Her clothes were clean but clearly secondhand. Her jeans had patches at the knees, and her t-shirt was faded from too many washings and harsh detergent. Her baseball cap was worn and stained with sweat. To these young soldiers, she looked like exactly what they expected a homeless person to look like. "You know what I think?" Thompson said, stepping closer to Sarah. "I think you're one of those people who goes around claiming to be a veteran to get free stuff. Am I right?" His friends laughed and encouraged him. The soldier named Rodriguez pulled out his phone and started recording. "This is going to be good," he said. "We should post this online." Sarah glanced around the area. There were other people nearby, but they were all giving the situation a wide berth. Nobody wanted to get involved with a group of soldiers who were clearly looking for trouble. She was on her own, which was nothing new. "I never said I was a veteran," Sarah replied evenly. This was technically true. She had not mentioned her military service to these men. "Oh, but you are, aren't you?" said the 3rd soldier. His name tag read Johnson. He was the smallest of the group but seemed eager to prove himself to the others. "I can tell by the way you stand. All you fake veterans think you can fool us real soldiers." The irony of the situation was not lost on Sarah. These young men had probably completed basic training and maybe one deployment. They thought they knew everything about military service and sacrifice. Meanwhile, she had spent over a decade in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. "Look," she said, trying once more to defuse the situation. "I don't want any trouble. I just need to use the computers inside for a job interview tomorrow." "A job interview?" Thompson laughed loudly. "Guys, she thinks someone's actually going to hire her. What kind of job could someone like you possibly get?" The 4th soldier, whose name tag read Davis, decided to join the fun. "Maybe she's applying to be a professional beggar. I hear that pays pretty well these days." Sarah felt anger building inside her chest, but she kept it controlled. During her SEAL training, she had learned to manage her emotions even in the most stressful situations. Anger could be useful, but only if it was channeled properly. The 5th soldier had been quiet until now. His name tag said Williams, and he looked younger than the others. Maybe 19 or 20. He seemed less comfortable with the bullying, but he was not brave enough to speak up against his friends. "Come on, guys," Williams said quietly. "Maybe we should just let her go inside." "Shut up, Williams," Thompson snapped. "This is educational. We're teaching this faker what real soldiers look like." He turned back to Sarah with renewed aggression. "You want to know what I think? I think you never served a day in your life. I think you're just another druggie looking for a handout. People like you make me sick." Sarah's hands remained relaxed at her sides, but her mind was calculating distances and angles. Thompson was about 6 feet tall and probably weighed 200 pounds. He was young and strong, but he was also overconfident and had no idea who he was dealing with. Rodriguez kept his phone camera focused on Sarah's face, hoping to capture her breaking down or getting angry. "This is going viral," he said. "Everyone needs to see what these fake veterans look like. You know what your problem is?" Johnson added. "You think just because you dress like a soldier and act all tough, people are going to feel sorry for you. But we can see right through your act." The small crowd that had gathered was getting larger. Some people looked uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, but others seemed entertained by the show. A few took out their own phones to record the confrontation. Sarah noticed an older man standing near the community center entrance. He wore a baseball cap with a Vietnam veteran patch and was watching the situation with a concerned expression. Their eyes met for a moment, and she saw recognition in his gaze. He knew she was military, even if these young soldiers could not see it. "Tell you what," Thompson said, getting more aggressive. "Since you want to pretend to be a soldier so badly, why don't you show us some of your military training? Can you do push-ups? Can you march? Or are you too weak and pathetic?" His friends thought this was hilarious. Davis started doing exaggerated jumping jacks while Johnson pretended to march in place like a cartoon soldier. Rodriguez kept recording everything. "Do you even know what the military is really like?" Thompson continued. "It's not some game you can pretend to play. Real soldiers sacrifice everything for their country. We train harder than you could ever imagine. We put our lives on the line while people like you sit around feeling sorry for yourselves." Sarah almost smiled at the irony. This young man was lecturing her about sacrifice and training, while she had scars on her body from injuries these soldiers could not even comprehend. She had trained with equipment and weapons they had never seen. She had completed missions they had only read about in magazines, but she said nothing. There was no point in trying to prove herself to people who had already made up their minds about who she was. "I bet you don't even know basic military facts," Davis said. "What's the difference between the Army and the Marines?" "She probably thinks the Navy is just for people who like boats," Rodriguez added with a laugh. Williams looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Guys, seriously, maybe we should go. People are staring." Thompson ignored him completely. He was enjoying the power he felt over someone he perceived as helpless. "You know what really gets me?" he said to Sarah. "It's that people like you take resources away from real veterans who actually deserve help. While you're out here pretending and begging, real heroes are struggling because there's not enough support to go around." This comment hit closer to home than the others. Sarah knew there were veterans who needed help and were not getting it. She had met many of them during her time on the streets. The system was overwhelmed and underfunded. But the solution was not to attack people who were trying to survive. "So what do you say?" Thompson demanded. "Are you going to admit you're a fake, or do we need to keep exposing you?" The crowd was getting restless. Some people were calling for the soldiers to leave the woman alone, while others were encouraging the confrontation. The situation was escalating beyond what any of them had expected. The situation was drawing more attention than any of them had anticipated. People coming and going from the community center were stopping to watch. Some pulled out phones to record the confrontation. A few shouted comments from the sidewalk. "Leave her alone," called out a middle-aged woman carrying groceries. "Yeah, 5 against 1 isn't fair," added a man walking his dog. But Thompson and his friends seemed energized by the audience. Rodriguez panned his phone camera across the crowd, narrating like he was hosting a television show. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rodriguez announced loudly, "we have here a classic case of stolen valor. Watch as we expose another fake veteran trying to scam hardworking Americans." Sarah remained perfectly still, but her mind was working rapidly. She was analyzing escape routes, counting potential allies and threats in the crowd, and calculating the best way to end this confrontation with minimal damage to everyone involved. The Vietnam veteran she had noticed earlier was slowly moving closer. He had the careful, deliberate movements of someone who had seen real combat. Sarah could tell he was positioning himself to intervene if necessary. "You know what I think we should do?" Thompson said to his friends, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I think we should make her prove she's really a veteran. Make her recite the Pledge of Allegiance or sing the national anthem or something." "That's a great idea," Johnson agreed enthusiastically. "Real veterans know that stuff by heart." Davis stepped closer to Sarah. "Come on, Faker. Let's hear it. If you're really military, this should be easy." The crowd was getting more divided. Some people were clearly uncomfortable with the harassment, while others seemed to think the soldiers had a point about fake veterans. The tension was building. Sarah made a decision. She was not going to be humiliated by these young men who knew nothing about her service or sacrifice, but she was also not going to escalate the situation into violence unless absolutely necessary. "Fine," she said quietly. Thompson grinned triumphantly. "Fine what? You're going to admit you're a fake?" "Fine, I'll answer your questions," Sarah replied. "But not here. Not like this." She gestured to the crowd and the phones recording everything. "You want to test my military knowledge? Let's do it properly, inside, just us. No cameras, no audience." The soldiers looked at each other uncertainly. This was not going the way they had expected. They had been hoping to humiliate her publicly, but now she was taking control of the situation. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked. "Are you afraid to test my knowledge without an audience to perform for?" Rodriguez lowered his phone slightly. "We're not afraid of anything." "Then prove it," Sarah said. "Come inside with me. Ask me whatever you want about military service. If I can't answer your questions, I'll admit I'm not a veteran. If I can answer them, you apologize and leave me alone." Thompson's confidence wavered for a moment. Something in Sarah's tone had changed. She no longer sounded like a defeated homeless person. There was authority in her voice that had not been there before. "That's not how this works," he said. "We don't negotiate with fakes." "Then you're cowards," Sarah said simply. The word hit the young soldiers like a physical blow. Being called a coward was one of the worst insults possible in military culture. Johnson's face turned red with anger. "What did you just say?" Johnson demanded. "You heard me," Sarah replied calmly. 5 young soldiers ganging up on one woman in front of a crowd, hiding behind cameras and audiences. If that's not cowardice, what is? Williams, the youngest of the group, looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Maybe she has a point," he said quietly. "This doesn't feel right." "Shut up, Williams," Thompson snapped. But his anger revealed his uncertainty. The Vietnam veteran stepped forward. "Son," he said to Thompson in a voice that carried decades of authority, "I think you boys need to step back and think about what you're doing here." Thompson turned to face the older man. "This doesn't concern you, old man." "It concerns me when I see soldiers dishonoring their uniform," the veteran replied. "This woman hasn't done anything to you. She's just trying to get inside that building." "She's a fake veteran trying to steal valor," Rodriguez said. "We're protecting the honor of real service members." The old veteran looked at Sarah for a long moment. Then he looked back at the 5 young soldiers. "How long have you boys been in service?" 2 years, Thompson said proudly. 8 months, Davis added. 6 months for me, Johnson said. Rodriguez and Williams admitted they had been in for less than a year each. The old veteran nodded slowly. "And how many deployments have you completed?" The soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Thompson had done 1 deployment. The others had never been overseas. "I did 36 months in Vietnam," the old veteran said quietly. 3 tours. "I've seen things you can't imagine. And I can tell you that this woman carries herself like someone who's seen combat." "How would you know?" Thompson challenged. "You can't tell just by looking at someone." "You're right," the old veteran agreed. "You can't always tell just by looking, but you can tell by watching how someone moves, how they position themselves, how they assess threats. This woman has training you boys haven't even dreamed of." Sarah appreciated the veteran's support, but she did not need anyone to fight her battles. "It's okay," she said to the old man. "I can handle this." She turned back to Thompson. "You wanted to test my military knowledge. Here's your chance. But if you're not brave enough to do it without your audience and your camera, just say so." The crowd was watching eagerly. Some people were shouting encouragement to Sarah, while others were telling the soldiers to back down. The situation was becoming a public spectacle that none of them had intended. Thompson looked around at his friends. They had started this confrontation expecting an easy target, but now they were being challenged to actually prove their point. Rodriguez was still holding his phone, but he had stopped recording. "You know what?" Thompson said finally. "Fine, we'll do it your way. But when you can't answer our questions, you're going to admit in front of all these people that you're a fraud." "Deal," Sarah said immediately. The 5 soldiers looked at each other nervously. They were beginning to realize they might have made a mistake. The community center had a small conference room that was usually used for group meetings. Sarah asked the receptionist if they could use it for a few minutes, explaining that she needed to clear up a misunderstanding with these soldiers. The receptionist, a kind woman in her 50s, looked concerned about the situation but agreed to let them use the room. As they walked inside, Sarah noticed how the soldiers moved. They were still cocky and aggressive, but there was uncertainty in their eyes now. Thompson was trying to maintain his leadership of the group, but the others were beginning to have doubts. The conference room was small and plain, with a rectangular table and 8 chairs. Sarah sat down on one side while the 5 soldiers arranged themselves on the other side. Without the crowd and cameras, the atmosphere was different. More intimate and somehow more serious. "Okay," Thompson said, trying to regain control of the situation. Let's get this over with. We're going to ask you some basic military questions that any real veteran would know. Sarah nodded calmly. Go ahead. Rodriguez pulled out a notebook and pen, apparently planning to keep score. First question, he said. What does AWOL stand for? Absent without leave, Sarah answered immediately. Lucky guess, Davis muttered. Johnson leaned forward. What's the NATO phonetic alphabet? Sarah rattled off the entire alphabet without hesitation. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, Golf, Hotel, India, Juliet, Kilo, Lima, Mike, November, Oscar, Papa, Quebec, Romeo, Sierra, Tango, Uniform, Victor, Whiskey, X-Ray, Yankee, Zulu. The soldiers exchanged glances. These were basic questions and she was answering them correctly, but that did not prove anything yet. What's a battle buddy? Thompson asked. A partner assigned during training for mutual support and accountability, Sarah replied. Williams, who had been quiet, asked the next question. What's the difference between cover and concealment? Sarah looked at him with interest. It was a more thoughtful question than the others had asked. Cover stops bullets. Concealment hides you from view but won't stop incoming fire. The young soldier nodded reluctantly. It was a perfect answer. Davis decided to try something harder. What's the maximum effective range of an M16A2? 550 meters for point targets, 800 meters for area targets, Sarah answered without hesitation. Rodriguez was getting frustrated. Anyone could look this stuff up online. These don't prove anything. Then ask me something that can't be looked up online, Sarah challenged. Thompson thought for a moment. Describe what it's like to be in a firefight. The room went quiet. This was not a question that could be answered from a book or website. Sarah sat back in her chair and studied the 5 young faces across from her. Only Thompson had seen any real action, and even his experience was limited. Which kind of firefight? Sarah asked quietly. Close quarters urban combat? Long-range engagement in open terrain? Ambush scenario? They're all different. The soldiers looked surprised that she had turned the question around on them. Sarah continued. In close quarters, everything happens fast. You move by instinct more than conscious thought. The sound is overwhelming, even with ear protection. The smell of gunpowder mixes with dust and sometimes blood. Time moves differently. Seconds feel like hours, but entire minutes can pass without you realizing it. Her voice was steady, but there was something in her tone that made the soldiers listen carefully. In long-range engagements, it's more methodical, she continued. You have time to think, to plan each shot. But that can be worse in some ways because you have more time to be scared. You're lying in the dirt for hours, sometimes days, waiting for the right moment. Thompson leaned forward. How many firefights have you been in? Sarah looked at him directly. More than you. That's not an answer, Rodriguez said. It's the only answer you're going to get, Sarah replied. Some questions are classified. Some experiences are private. If you were really experienced soldiers, you would understand that. Johnson tried a different approach. What branch did you serve in? Navy. Navy doesn't see combat like that, Davis scoffed. Navy stays on ships. Sarah's expression did not change. Some Navy personnel do stay on ships. Others have different assignments, like what? Thompson challenged. Like special operations. The room went completely silent. The soldiers stared at her in disbelief. Rodriguez was the first to speak. You're claiming to be special forces? I'm not claiming anything, Sarah said calmly. I'm answering your questions. Special Forces is Army, Johnson said. Navy doesn't have Special Forces. Navy has Special Warfare, Sarah corrected. SEALs, SWCC, EOD. Different name, same concept. Thompson laughed, but it sounded forced. You're saying you're a SEAL? That's ridiculous. Women can't be SEALs. Women couldn't be SEALs, Sarah corrected. Past tense. Things change. Williams, who had been quietly listening, asked, When did women first complete SEAL training? Sarah looked at him with something approaching respect. He was asking the right questions. The program opened to women in 2016. The first woman completed training in 2017. That was only 8 years ago, Rodriguez said. You're too old to have been one of the first, Sarah smiled slightly. I didn't say I was the first. I said I was one of the first. Thompson was getting angry again. This is insane. You expect us to believe that a homeless woman is a Navy SEAL? Former Navy SEAL, Sarah corrected. And I don't expect you to believe anything. You asked questions, I answered them. You can believe whatever you want. Davis tried one more approach. If you're really a SEAL, prove it. Do something that shows your training. Sarah shook her head. I'm not here to perform tricks for your entertainment. You wanted to test my military knowledge. I've answered every question correctly. If that's not enough proof for you, then nothing will be. The 5 soldiers looked at each other uncertainly. They had started this confrontation expecting to expose a fraud, but now they were faced with someone who clearly knew things that could only come from real military experience. Maybe, Williams said quietly. We made a mistake. Thompson glared at him. Don't be an idiot. She's just good at pretending. But the doubt was growing. Sarah's answers had been too quick, too accurate, too detailed to be fake, and there was something about the way she carried herself, the way she spoke about combat that was different from what they had expected. The tension in the small conference room was thick. Sarah sat quietly while the 5 soldiers whispered among themselves. She could see the doubt spreading through their group like cracks in ice. Williams was the first to break ranks. I think we should apologize, he said, loud enough for Sarah to hear. Apologize for what? Thompson snapped. We still don't have proof of anything. Sarah reached into her worn backpack and pulled out the faded photograph she always carried. She placed it on the table where all 5 soldiers could see it. The image showed 8 people in military gear, faces painted with camouflage, standing in front of a helicopter in what was clearly a desert environment. Helmand Province, Afghanistan, Sarah said quietly. 2019 counter-terrorism operation. The soldiers leaned forward to examine the photograph. Even in the faded image, they could see that this was not a staged photo. The equipment was authentic. The environment was real, and the faces showed the kind of fatigue and intensity that could not be faked. Rodriguez pointed at a figure in the center of the photo. Is that you? Sarah nodded. In the photograph, she looked younger and stronger, but the facial features were unmistakably hers. She was wearing full combat gear and holding an assault rifle with the easy familiarity of someone who had used such weapons many times. This could be photoshopped, Davis said, but his voice lacked conviction. Look at the metadata, Sarah replied. Check the photo quality. This was taken with a military camera 8 years ago, long before the photoshopping technology got good enough to create something like this. Johnson picked up the photograph and studied it more closely. The gear looks authentic. That's a Mk-18 rifle, and the body armor is the right type for that time period. Thompson grabbed the photo from Johnson's hands. Anyone could get a picture like this from the internet, could they? Sarah asked. She reached back into her backpack and pulled out a military identification card. It was clearly her face, but with the name Lieutenant Sarah Martinez and the official seal of the U.S. Navy. The soldiers passed the ID card around the table. It had all the security features of a genuine military identification, including the holographic elements that were nearly impossible to counterfeit. This doesn't make sense, Rodriguez said. If you're really a Navy SEAL, how did you end up homeless? For the first time since the confrontation began, Sarah's composure cracked slightly. Pain flashed across her face before she regained control. Combat veterans have a homeless rate almost 4 times higher than civilians, she said quietly. PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, difficulty adjusting to civilian life. The transition isn't always smooth. Williams looked ashamed. We didn't know. You didn't ask, Sarah replied. You saw someone who looked poor and assumed you knew their story. Thompson was still refusing to accept what was becoming obvious to the others. Even if this stuff is real, it doesn't excuse stolen valor. You should have identified yourself as military from the beginning. Why? Sarah asked. So you could treat me differently? I don't want special treatment because of my service. I want to be treated with basic human dignity regardless of my background. Davis was studying the photograph again. If you don't mind me asking, what happened over there? In Afghanistan, I mean. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was distant, as if she was seeing something far away. My team was tasked with rescuing hostages being held by a terrorist cell. Intelligence said there were 3 civilians, but when we got there we found 12, including 4 children. The soldiers listened intently. The extraction became complicated. We had to fight our way out through hostile territory. My teammate Marcus was hit by sniper fire. She gestured to the photograph. He's the tall one on the left. We carried him for 6 miles while under intermittent fire. Did he make it? Williams asked softly. Sarah nodded. He made it. Lost his left leg below the knee, but he made it. All the hostages survived too. Thompson was still looking at the military ID. Despite his resistance, the evidence was overwhelming. Why didn't you tell us this from the beginning? Because I shouldn't have to prove my worth to walk into a public building, Sarah replied. Because my service record doesn't define who I am as a person. Because you should treat people with respect regardless of whether they've worn a uniform. Rodriguez had put his phone away completely. We screwed up, didn't we? Yes, Sarah said simply. You did. The room fell silent again. The young soldiers were beginning to understand the magnitude of their mistake. They had not just harassed a homeless person. They had harassed a decorated veteran who had served with more distinction than any of them could imagine. Johnson spoke up. What can we do to make this right? You can learn from this, Sarah replied. You can remember that you can't judge people by their appearance or their current circumstances. Everyone has a story, and most of those stories are more complicated than they look on the surface. Williams nodded earnestly. We will, I promise. Thompson was struggling with his pride. He had led this confrontation and was having the hardest time accepting that he had been wrong. If you're really a SEAL, why didn't you fight back? You could have taken all of us. Sarah looked at him with something that might have been pity. Because fighting isn't always the answer. Because violence should be the last resort, not the first. Because I learned a long time ago that real strength sometimes means walking away. She stood up and gathered her photograph and ID card, putting them back in her backpack. Besides, she added with a slight smile, I had nothing to prove to you. You're the ones who needed to learn something today. Davis looked confused. What do you mean? You're also focused on proving how tough you are, how military you are, that you forgot the most important part of military service, Sarah explained. We serve to protect people, not to intimidate them. We're supposed to help those who can't help themselves, not attack them when they're down. The lesson was sinking in. These young soldiers had been so eager to prove their military credentials that they had forgotten the values that military service was supposed to represent. You're right, Williams said quietly. We forgot what we're supposed to stand for. Sarah moved toward the door. Your intentions might have been good. You thought you were protecting the honor of military service, but the way you went about it was wrong. Real honor comes from how you treat people when they can't fight back, not from how tough you can act when you have all the advantages. As she reached for the door handle, Thompson finally spoke up. Wait. Sarah paused at the door and turned back to face Thompson. The young soldier's face had changed completely from the arrogant expression he had worn outside. Now he looked younger, more uncertain and genuinely remorseful. I owe you an apology, Thompson said, standing up from his chair. We all do. What we did out there was wrong, and there's no excuse for it. The other soldiers stood up as well, forming a line behind Thompson. Each of their faces showed varying degrees of shame and regret for their actions. I'm sorry too, Rodriguez said. He pulled out his phone and showed Sarah the screen. I deleted the video I was recording. Nobody's going to see it. Williams stepped forward. Ma'am, I should have spoken up earlier. I knew what we were doing was wrong, but I was too much of a coward to stop it. Sarah studied each of their faces carefully. She had learned to read people quickly and accurately during her military service, and she could see that their remorse was genuine. These were young men who had made a serious mistake and were beginning to understand the consequences of their actions. Apologies are a good start, she said, but they're meaningless unless they lead to changed behavior. Davis nodded eagerly. We understand. This will never happen again. That's what you say now, Sarah replied. But what happens next week when you see someone else who looks like an easy target? What happens when you're bored and looking for entertainment? Thompson met her gaze directly. It won't happen again. I give you my word as a soldier. Your word as a soldier, Sarah repeated. Do you understand what that means? It means my honor is on the line, Thompson said. It means I'm accountable for my actions and the actions of my team. Sarah nodded slowly. That's right. And honor isn't something you can put on and take off with your uniform. It's something you carry with you every day in every situation. She walked back into the room and sat down at the table again. The soldiers remained standing, unsure of what to do. Sit down, Sarah said. If you really want to learn something from this, then listen carefully. The 5 young men sat down immediately, eager to hear what she had to say. You're all new to military service, Sarah began. You're proud of your uniforms and your training, and that's good. You should be proud. But pride can become arrogance if you're not careful, and arrogance can lead you to do things you'll regret. Williams raised his hand tentatively. How do we avoid that? By remembering why you joined the military in the first place, Sarah replied. What made you want to serve your country? The soldiers looked at each other and then began to answer. I wanted to protect people, Williams said. I wanted to serve something bigger than myself, Rodriguez added. My grandfather was a Marine, Johnson said. I wanted to honor his legacy, Davis nodded. I wanted to make a difference in the world. Thompson was the last to answer. I wanted to be a hero. Sarah focused on him. What does it mean to be a hero? Thompson thought for a moment. I guess I used to think it meant being tough and fearless, winning fights and proving how strong you are. And now, Sarah prompted. Now I think maybe it means protecting people who can't protect themselves, doing the right thing even when it's hard. Sarah smiled for the first time since the confrontation began. That's a good start. Real heroes don't pick on homeless people. Real heroes help them. Rodriguez leaned forward. Is there anything we can do to help you? I mean, beyond apologizing? Sarah considered the question carefully. There might be. But first, I want to know why you really want to help. Is it because you feel guilty? Or because you genuinely care about making things right? Both, Johnson admitted honestly. We feel terrible about what we did, but we also want to be better soldiers and better people. Fair enough, Sarah said. Here's what you can do. There's a veterans shelter about 10 blocks from here. They need volunteers to help with meals, job training, and basic services. If you really want to honor your military service, spend some time there. Meet some of the people you're supposed to be protecting. The soldiers exchanged glances and nodded in agreement. We'll do it, Thompson said. All of us. Good, Sarah replied. And while you're there, remember that every person you meet has a story. Some are veterans like me. Some are civilians who fell on hard times. All of them deserve to be treated with dignity. Davis pulled out his phone and made a note. What's the name of the shelter? Phoenix Veterans Haven, Sarah said. Ask for Maria Rodriguez when you get there. Tell her Sarah Martinez sent you. Williams looked surprised. You volunteer there? When I can, Sarah said. It's hard to help others when you're struggling yourself. But sometimes helping others is what keeps you going. The room was quiet for a moment as the soldiers absorbed this information. Ma'am, Thompson said formally. May I ask you something personal? Sarah nodded. How do you do it? How do you stay strong when everything seems to be falling apart? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering how to answer. You take it one day at a time, she said finally. You remember that your current situation isn't permanent unless you let it be. You focus on what you can control and try, not to worry about what you can't. And you remember that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness. She stood up again and gathered her backpack. Speaking of which, I have a job interview to prepare for. That's why I needed to use the computers here. Rodriguez jumped up. What kind of job? Security work. It's not much, but it's a start. Thompson looked thoughtful. You know, my uncle runs a private security company. They specialize in high-end clients who need bodyguards and security consultants. Someone with your background might be exactly what they're looking for. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Why would you help me after what just happened? Because it's the right thing to do, Thompson replied. And because someone with your skills and experience deserves better than standing around a shopping mall. For the first time in months, Sarah felt a spark of hope. Maybe this confrontation, as ugly as it had started, might actually lead to something positive. I'd appreciate the contact information, she said. Thompson wrote down his uncle's name and phone number on a piece of paper. Tell him I sent you. And ma'am? Thank you. For teaching us something we really needed to learn. Sarah took the paper and looked at each of the young soldiers one more time. Remember this feeling, she told them. Remember how it feels to realize you've hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Let it motivate you to be better. As she walked toward the door, Williams called out, Ma'am, will we see you at the shelter? Sarah paused and smiled. Count on it. And next time we meet, I hope it's because you're there to help, not because you're looking for someone to push around. She walked out of the conference room, leaving 5 young soldiers who had learned a lesson they would never forget. They had started the day thinking they were protecting military honor by attacking someone they perceived as weak. They were ending it with a deeper understanding of what honor really meant, and a commitment to live up to the values they had sworn to defend.